Welcome to New Cyber Frontier, bringing you the latest news on cybersecurity and the local Colorado economy, focused on cybersecurity industry growth and initiatives that support cybersecurity economics. We hope this special series on blockchain builds your excitement for a possible future which empowers individual privacy. Please follow and participate as New Cyber Frontier is supporting a grassroots community effort to empower the individual in the digital age. Check out privacyforthepeople.org to see the upcoming crowdfunding campaign. Now sit back and enjoy as we introduce our great guest for today's show. Welcome to today's episode of New Cyber Frontier. On today we have Roop, who is the CEO and founder of Intuit Factory, and there he is. Blockchain strategies for business leader, a Tedx speaker on blockchain and digital identities, digital rights, a big advocate of using blockchain for digital rights and digital privacy. Love that we had a conversation before, and I just loved it, and we want to have him on the show to talk to everybody about his knowledge and energy in this space, and it's excessive. It's large. So Roop, thanks for joining today. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Chris. I'm wonderful. These are exciting times.
Definitely. And Roop, can you give us your background, a little bit about yourself? Make sure you explain your collection that we talked about before. But give us your background.
You should tell them what collection are you referring to, unless they get some different ideas.
If you're watching the YouTube video, you'll see that Roop is wearing a turban, and last time we had to talk about he has a collection of turbans, and I said, I know people that collect baseball caps, so 50 to 100 would be a range that wouldn't be accessible. So how many do you have now, you said?
Somewhere around 35, I think.
Okay. But yeah.
All different colors.
All different colors. Everything fits the right accessorizing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, give us your background, Roop.
Sure. So my background is at the intersection of business and technology. I've been lately in business process improvement, business process automation for the last 10 years or so. And then last 5 years or so, pivoted into the blockchain space since I thought that this is the most effective business process efficiency technique and technology that we have available. And I saw companies were not looking into it from that point of view per se, and I thought we could add value in helping companies navigate their journey in the blockchain space. So depending on where they are, leading them from curiosity to awareness to further understanding and then investment and action.
Interesting. So how did you get, what's your you talk about business. What's your background? Are you always from Atlanta? What do you like to do? What kind of hobbies?
So I'm originally from India, as you could probably tell. I've been in the United States for the last 16, 17 years or so. Mm-hmm. Educational background in computer science and engineering, and then master's in information technology and business of technology. Mm-hmm. I like to read quite a bit. I'm a reader. I'm into meditation and yoga and all things you might consider as Eastern philosophy as well. Okay. And obviously I collect turbans, as we talked about.
So tell us about your TEDx speech and on blockchain, and give us kind of a recap on that.
Yeah, for sure. It was an amazing experience just to go through that learning process to even give a TEDx talk, and then the reception that we received from that day. Phenomenal to experience that on a live stage. It was at the Rialto Center for Performing Arts in Atlanta, an amazing performing arts stage with a lot of legendary performers come there. The idea was to create a discussion, a debate, a dialogue on digital identity rights. And I believe that digital identity rights are fundamental human rights. We as originators and creators of all this digital data that we create, we need to have ownership and consent over the use of such data. So in the talk, I talk about how there are a number of hacks, and companies acquire our data with all different means, and they are not able to keep it secure. The latest one, as you've seen, is the Capital One hack. So I'm sure in the cybersecurity community, you guys talk about that as well. So my question there is not just can we have retroactive or reactive approaches to cybersecurity. I question the way, the manner, and the technology they use to store this data. And then comes the question of compliance as well. So if you see, GDPR is a European regulation, and then we have in the United States, we have a regulation out of California, and if you look around the world, China, Brazil, different countries have similar regulations that are inspired by GDPR. Now they're talking about GDPR too. The problem is, even for GDPR, about, I would say 80% of companies are still non-compliant. And they've asked for extension.
Let's take a break and hear from our sponsors. We come right back, though, and talk about regulation and recap on your Tedx. Right back.
Thank you.
Cyber Resilience Institute helps build strong cyber communities designed to prevent members from attack. Like building a neighborhood watch, it takes coordination and a sharing community to protect our identities and valuables in the virtual world. Typically, we hear that organizations know they need to do something to protect their cyber assets, but don't know where to begin. Let Cyber Resilience Institute help your community create an action plan. Cyber Resilience Institute will build your community or business marketplace so that it is designed to support a collective cyber defense. Contact them for more information at cyberresilienceinstitute.org.
Welcome back to New Cyber Frontier. Talking to Roop Singh today, and he was going through his recap on his Tedx. So can we continue with that, Roop?
Sure. So the challenge is that GDPR is here, but most companies are not compliant with it. So I assert that blockchain as a technology is a very valid technology for storing and sharing your identity, and to set up a platform and an environment where users have consent over how that identity is used, for what purpose, and I go even further and say maybe there is a compensation component to it. So the challenge that we see is regulators have designed this legal framework, companies are trying to retroactively be compliant, users are not even part of that discussion. So what can we do to bring all the actors together? It is necessary for the digital world, the digital economy that we live in, that companies will have on data. But at the same time, what is the role of the consumer? What is your and my role as owners of our own identity? And I believe blockchain-enabled platforms can bring all of the actors together and solve for all of these constraints. So for further detail, I invite you to watch the talk.
Okay, and definitely we'll put up the link for that, and definitely check out Roop's talk on TEDx. So it sounds like a utopian society there that we're theorizing about, though, when it comes down to it. How far out is that from being a reality?
I don't think it's utopian. I mean, we're talking about a self-sovereign identity environment. We're talking about where our data is being used, but also being protected. So let's raise the stakes here. Let's talk about, when I talk about digital identity, people just think of stuff they put on Facebook or city pictures that they share on Instagram. I'm not really talking about just that. Stakes are much higher. Think about your biometric data. Think about your genetic data. Think about your financial transaction data. Who has it? How is it being used? And how can we keep it secure? The fact of the matter is that the data is out there. And now there are companies developing solutions which will move into that environment. And digital identity, and one of the things about it thematically, when internet was first formed, we missed a layer in the internet. There is a whole missing layer of digital identity, which there were talks about initially when the internet was just coming about to be what it is now. There were talks about including a digital identity. And if that was the case, the internet that we see today would look very different. But what you see now, there are few companies that control our experience of the internet. And it's not as decentralized or democratized as we originally started what its roots were. So this is a problem to be solved, and this is a problem that's not going away. So the way I look at it is people are looking at blockchain as an enabler to solve for digital identity and furthermore to solve for digital rights. And if you look at Libra, the Facebook's announcement of their blockchain network, people look at that in terms of cryptocurrency. Hidden in there is a couple of sentences that essentially speak about this missing identity layer from the internet. And I think that is a valuable use of blockchain. Now, we can discuss whether Facebook is the right company to do so, since they have such a checkered record on keeping our data safe or using it for the purpose that's intended. That's a different conversation. But fundamentally, the ability of blockchain as a technology to be used for this case will have a widespread impact. Think about it, every human and every species that walks on this earth has an identity. Every device has an identity. And now imagine the world where billions of devices are talking to billions of humans, and vice versa. The amount of data that we are generating, we need a secure underlying layer for all of those transactions too.
Yeah, I definitely see that and agree that that's a missing hole and something that is needed. I think blockchain is a good solution for it, in theory. But as we move along, and we'll talk about the operation, everybody's standing up a chain. We have over 2,000 of them, I think, now listed.
Easily.
And the definitive identity on one chain doesn't equal the other 1,999. So it's almost that when you start looking at the technologies going a different direction than the theorized use of blockchain. Thoughts?
Yeah, so I don't believe in a winner-take-all approach. I don't believe that there will only be certain chains or certain platforms remaining. I think in the world that we will live in, we will have multiple of these platforms depending on the use case. So there could be one or two de facto or default platforms, let's say for specific financial services application. And there could be another one to store genetic data. There could be another one to design video game application on blockchain. There could be another one that's used more for identity solutions. So it's like going back, I would say 20 or so years ago, when there was this first advent of ERPs. So, eventually what we see now is 3 or 4 major companies that dominate the ERP space, be it Oracle, SAPs, or NetSuites of the world. Imagine now ERP being one ecosystem or one environment. We will probably have hundreds of ERPs specific to the use case and specific to the industry or the ecosystem in question.
Yeah, I guess that's a good analogy. If we think, and coming up here on another break in about a minute, so if we think, what does that parallel and the technology, we're taking a good look at it from the business standpoint, but there's a lot of and I just totally drew a blank. This happens occasionally. Looking over over my notes here. That's where I was going with that. So many people relay that blockchain synonymous with Bitcoin, synonymous with cryptocurrency. We're talking about it for digital identities. There's many other theorized uses: business document control, real estate transactions, business documents, notaries, you name it. Whatever's, hey, you need to trace transactions between people, between organizations, between entities, between systems, people, like you said. How do we get the mindset of cryptocurrency as a banking transaction? Blockchain is a banking thing now, out of people's mind, and kind of say, this is just one application. How do you make that differentiation with people and Give me about 30 seconds, and we got to go on break for our sponsor.
Sure. So we have to educate folks, and this is chapter number 1 in my course, where we separate blockchain and cryptocurrency. And here's my opinion on that. I believe they have common origins, of course, cryptocurrency and blockchain, but they have linked trajectories, but distinct destinies.
Okay.
So think about that.
Hold on, Nat. We'll come back to finish that thought right after we hear from our sponsor.
Okay.
Welcome back to New Cyber Frontier on our series in blockchain today, talking to Roop Singh. And before the break, he gave us a great quote. And I want you to say that quote again, starting out as to how do we tell and make this differentiation between blockchain is not a banking thing for currencies. It is something bigger. Go ahead.
So blockchain and crypto, they have common origins, and they have linked trajectories, but distinct destinies. So blockchain is a foundational, fundamental technology. It's like saying Facebook is equal to the internet. If you actually talk about back in the 90s, people used to think that the browser that you use is the same thing as the internet, right? But it is not, obviously. So the idea that a foundational, fundamental technology can result in a multitude of use cases is something that people are just now understanding. And I think the more we get the mainstream into it, the more we educate people, the more we have these open dialogues, people will start to realize that this is something that they may not experience as a user. A lot of this happens behind the scenes. You know, today if you send pictures on Instagram, you don't think about how Instagram actually functions. But if you are one of the business leaders, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a technology aficionado, if you're an enthusiast, you want to understand that how blockchain will not only evolve into a different financial infrastructure or banking infrastructure, but it will actually permeate our lives in all kinds of ways. There are reports about 40-something industries being disrupted by blockchain. It'll have impact in real estate, finance, gaming, advertising, digital identity, as we said. Name an industry. I used to play a game. Tell me an industry, and I'll tell you a use case. So supply chain, healthcare, even consumer retail, the food that you eat, the drinks that you drink. If your wine and your spinach could be tracked, and so could be your produce. It'll have a direct impact on our lives. And furthermore, we're still talking about blockchain as an information sharing mechanism. If you look even further than that, I think blockchain is Internet 2.0, meaning it can be used as an internet of value transfer. Let's talk about tokenization and digital tokens. And if you can tokenize this building or tokenize your new sneakers or tokenize art, those things can then be easily traded online with much less friction and much less players involved than there today. So we would have opened up doors to an economic model that we don't even see a glimpse of today. So if I was back in 20 years ago talking about how internet would work, and if I told you you will have a whole set of devices on this one device, a whole set of applications, you wouldn't believe me. It's in the same way that you wouldn't, what will happen 10 years hence. And I don't think that we are far. We're actually looking at the speed of adoption has increased over the years. So if you give me some time, I'll make 4 or 5 predictions in this space that'll happen in the next 10 years.
Interesting. Yeah, that's something that when you get those predictions, I'm not going to hold you to it right now, but I'll even help with give you some,
Free.
and we'll look at making our blog and or putting those out there. So, but two things that you talked about briefly, and I wanted to elaborate or get your opinion on. First of all, there's going to be good industries, good apps that this makes sense for, and then there's some, not really so. How does somebody go about identifying, is what I'm looking for needing a blockchain, or is it not? How do I make that determination? What recommendations do you give?
Yeah, for sure. So we have a lot of people coming to us saying, oh, I want a blockchain use case, but maybe it's not a suitable thing. So we've designed 8 principles that we looked at. And if it's not addressing majority of those principles, if your problem or use case is not addressing majority of those principles, then you probably shouldn't use blockchain. So I'll give you a few just to get the discussion going here. Think about automation. Think about lack of trust in the current state in an environment. Think about ownership. So anything to do with ownership. Look at land titles, or the title of your car, or the fact that you own this phone, or the fact that you own a pet. Everything to do with ownership will eventually be on a blockchain environment. So if you're not solving for some of these things, if you don't see a lack of trust in a certain environment, if you don't see process efficiency gains brought to you by blockchain automation, and that too, I'm not talking about incremental 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% gains. I'm talking about transformational gains. I'm talking about drastic gains. So, for instance, in the previous banking infrastructure using a SWIFT network, and when we deposited a check, it would take 3 to 4 days for a check to clear and settle. I mean, did we question why that is the case? We all took that as, well, that's how it is. But why? Why can't I have it sooner? So now with a blockchain-enabled network where both the counterparties are on the same network, we can reduce that from 4 days to 4 seconds. That's a drastic improvement. We're going from horse buggies to airplanes. Right? That's the level of shift that we are looking at. And if you're not getting that level of shift, in my conversations with business leaders, I say, listen, if you can do something with current state technology, and if you don't get this transformational efficiency gain, then don't consider blockchain, just for the sake of doing it.
So, and one of my previous guests, we've been doing a series on blockchain, said that blockchain is an addition to an existing application, existing use case. It's not anything new, and you can't do anything with it on its own. So it's a supporting technology, not the main focus. Would you say that's true? Same thing?
I would disagree with that.
Okay.
So the way I look at it, let's talk about those predictions, and we'll connect the dots there, and you'll see why I do that.
Okay.
So to me, most of the world's transactions, let's say 50% of the world's transactions, be retail transactions or trade finance transactions, which are much higher value transactions. I would say about 50% of those transactions will be on some form of crypto-based asset in the next 10 years. So before 2030 arrives, 50% of world transactions will be on some form of crypto-based blockchain-enabled asset. That's prediction number 1. Prediction number 2, any kind of ownership, as we said before, your car, your television, your pet, any kind of ownership would then be now proved by a blockchain-based record-keeping system. Period. And I think that you see signs of that happening already, right? Blockchain will become the underlying layer of data sharing for IoT-based applications, right? So if you think of blockchain as a foundational new set of infrastructure, what companies may do now is to sort of switch over a little bit as a rollover, in a rollover fashion, and that's why they can call it as supporting technology. But eventually, on a longer scheme of things, the current infrastructure is just not adequate. It's not secure, it's not efficient, and not just that, the business process that it enables is not efficient and secure. So either there will be disruptors that will change that, or incumbent companies will realize that they have to go to the next set of technology and entrance. And that takes time, understood. But to me, it's not a supportive technology. It's a foundational technology that would shift a lot of the processes that we see in the world today.
Interesting. Most of these applications we talk about are transfer of ownership, things between people, organizations, data transfer. Every single one of those, when you think blockchain, is basically requires a whole industry to buy in.
Mm-hmm.
That traditionally is not something that happens quickly.
Yeah, sure.
It seems like that even though, yes, there's this pie in the sky, this is a great technology, it's going to take off, there's also the places where it has to go to really be effective take the longest to make change in those areas, and the longest to get adoption, the longest to get buy-in, the most people. It's a continuous knocking on doors of you're getting one person at a time, until you have everybody. You're going to a standards group and making regulation require, and we know the time cycles for regulation and legislation just long term. What's your thoughts on that? That, when you give time frames, it seems like that this technology or this thought process, even though it's utopian, might be further out or more difficult than we think.
Yeah. So I don't believe it's pie in the sky anymore. If we were talking in 2014, 15, maybe 16, then yeah, you can think about pie in the sky. There are enough successful use cases that companies have customers on. And more importantly, they have infrastructure developed to say that there is value, right? This narrative of pie in the sky is a very incumbent enterprise-led narrative, and we can get into reasons why. I do agree that there has to be adoption within an ecosystem that includes customer and your industry players, etc. But think about it in a way that there could be new players involved, right? So I don't believe that enterprises are leaders in this space. They're not innovators in this space. They're more laggards in this space, and that's the narrative that they like to push, which is understandable. They have a much more conservative approach to emerging technology, and for them, blockchain is one of the many emerging technologies that they have to look at. I understand that point of view. What you will notice is that there are disruptors. There are newer companies. There are companies that are building now that are the unicorns of the future. Those are the ones that are bringing most of the innovation. Those are the ones that are bringing most of the knowledge base, most of the intellectual property, and most of the new future vision that they believe in, right? So that's another thing to think about. Another point of view to observe is that a lot of the use cases that we talk about and the adoption of such technologies within a broader ecosystem, United States is not a leader in it. Let's just put it out there. Asia and Europe are way far ahead, like by miles, right? Or if you want to talk in blockchain, by a few hundred blocks, they're further away in not only understanding the technology, which is technical expertise, but actually developing solutions and getting people to use it and getting their ecosystem to evolve. So I'll give you an example. Just came to my mind just now. So there's a company in England called Navarro. Navarro was the first company to put a security, a bond, on the blockchain, on actually a public chain, on an Ethereum chain, in 2017 or 18, I forget. But the way they did it is by involving the UK regulator, FCA, and they played in the FCA financial sandbox. They educated the regulator, and they issued this bond, which was now then considered a financial instrument as well as a legal instrument, right? So what they have done, hence, is they have figured out a way to issue securities on a public chain. That's unique. That's as remarkable as laying out the first railroad back in 1800s. So what they've also done is reduce the cost of putting a security on the chain by thousands of pounds. I think the numbers were they've reduced the cost from 40,000 pounds to 50 pounds. So if you're an investment bank, you can put out a security under 50 pounds. So that kind of a leapfrog doesn't happen only by technologists. It doesn't happen only by some industry group. You have to get all the consortium together. And there are, I've talked to a few consortiums here that are struggling. So there are a few strategies depending on if you are a disruptor, a disruption creator, or you're a disruption survivor that you could take based on where you are in the scheme of things. But it certainly doesn't mean that it's going to take long. But in fact, if you look at the global scheme of things over a longer period of time, there's a chart somewhere on the internet. How long did it take for us to adopt Tedx or the wire telegram system? Then we got to phones, like landline phones. How long did it take for us to adopt that? And how long did it take for us to adopt cable and then television or analog television? And then getting into mobile phones. And then think about how long did it take for us to adopt to mobile applications, right? So if you look at the whole scheme of things here, the rate of adoption has increased. So, and the other thing to think about is when we talk about blockchain, we are now in the second wave. This is the 11th year. So it's not as new or fresh or as immature that people talk about. It is certainly not as mature as you would want it to be in terms of technology, in terms of scalability for some use cases, in terms of adoption, of course, yes. But it's not where it started, in 2009, 2010. So we are in the second phase of that adoption. We've already put 10, 11 years into it. I'm talking another 10 years and the world looks different.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of on that note, we're reaching the time we usually wrap up the show, but I always want to give people the opportunity to say, what is it that you do? How can people reach out to you? What services do you offer? Go ahead and put out anything that you want to at this point.
For sure. So we're about to launch an online program called Blockchain Strategy and Innovations. This is for business leaders, and you can sign up for updates or discounts at our website. I'm sure you have that. And then in terms of services, we work both with enterprises and startups. So we've figured out a formula, a model, if you will, to determine why do blockchain companies fail and hence why do they succeed. So if we can help you succeed or help you not to fail, we'll be happy to do that depending on where you are in your evolution. So it means something different for enterprises versus startups, but that's something that we can help you navigate.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for joining today, Roop. It's definitely a pleasure, and we look forward to having you back on for future conversations.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This has been wonderful.
Thanks. Bye. We hope you have enjoyed this episode of New Cyber Frontier. Remember, please follow and participate as New Cyber Frontier is supporting a grassroots community effort to empower the individual in the digital age. Check it out at privacyforthepeople.org. Also, make sure to join our mailing list so we can keep you informed. If you have an idea, if you have a question you would like to hear answered, or if you just want to get involved in what we're doing, reach out to us at newcyberfrontier.com. We also encourage you to visit our sponsors links because they are the ones that really make this show possible. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of New Cyber Frontier.